Picture this. It's late. Midnight has long since passed, and you're alone. The world around you is asleep. Suddenly, you hear a knock at the door. Not a frantic pounding, but not a casual rap either. A demand. You open the door, expecting a neighbor or a stranded motorist. Instead, you see them. Children. 2 of them. They're wearing hoodies pulled low. They speak in a strange, monotone, rhythmic chant. Let us in. We need to use your phone. And then they look up. There are no irises. There are no whites in their eyes. Only an empty, bottomless void. A liquid midnight. What are they? What do they want? And more importantly, what happens if you let them in? Welcome to Chilled Bones. If you're anything like me, you probably spent a good chunk of your childhood being told not to talk to strangers, which is good classic common sense advice. But usually, when our parents gave us the stranger danger talk, they were worried about some guy in a sketchy van offering us knockoff Pokemon cards, not ancient soulless entities disguised as junior high kids wearing oversized Gap hoodies. Now, if you're a fan of the deep dive horror community, grab a coffee because we're going to be here for a while. You know how these icebergs work. We'll start here at the surface, wading through the internet lore you've probably heard, before diving straight into the deep, dark, existential abyss where the rules of reality completely break down. Black Eyed Kids, or BEKs if you want to sound like a paranormal investigator who takes themselves way too seriously, are one of the internet's most enduring urban legends. The basic setup is always the same. They approach you in an isolated location, your porch, your parked car, a quiet hotel room. They ask for a small favor, usually requiring entry into your private space. They exert a bizarre, almost hypnotic wave of dread over you, and their eyes look like someone filled their sockets with squid ink. But where did this whole thing actually start? Is it just an old school creepypasta that got way out of hand? Or is there a genuine historical phenomenon hiding beneath all the digital noise? Well, let's see if we can't figure this out. Tier 1, the surface. To understand the Black Eyed Kids, we have to travel all the way back to the ancient dial-up internet days of 1998. The setting is Abilene, Texas. A journalist named Brian Bethel was parked outside of a movie theater, sitting in his car under the glow of a marquee, using the dome light to write out a check, like people used to do in those days. Suddenly, there's a tap on his driver's side window. Bethel rolls the window down just a crack because even in 1998, you don't just fully roll your window down for random people at midnight, though why he was writing a check in his car this late at night seems suspect to me. Anyway, standing next to the car are 2 boys, around 10 to 12 years old. They're wearing hoodies, looking totally normal at first glance. One of the kids speaks up. His voice is smooth, articulate, but completely devoid of the usual stuttering or awkward cadence of a preteen. He says they want to see a movie, but they left their money at their mother's house. Now they need a ride. Just a quick lift to go grab their cash. Bethel immediately notes that his body is screaming at him to run. It wasn't a standard, oh, these kids are a bit weird feeling. It was a primal evolutionary fight-or-flight panic. The kid notices Bethel hesitating and changes his tactic. He becomes more demanding. Come on, mister. We're just kids. We don't have a gun. Let us in. We can't get in your car unless you tell us it's okay. And that's where Bethel looks them dead in the face. In the ambient glow of the theater marquee, he realizes their eyes are completely, universally black. No sclera, no iris, just two pools of black obsidian. Bethel, possessing actual survival instincts, slams the car into reverse and pulls out of the parking space. As he drives away, he looks back in his rearview mirror. The kids are gone. The parking lot is totally empty. Bethel later posted this story to a private internet mailing list dedicated to ghost stories, and from there, it spread across the early web like wildfire. From that first post, it became the blueprint. What makes the Abilene story so fascinating isn't just the creepy eyes, it's the fact that it established a highly specific set of behavioral rules that almost every single subsequent BEK report follows. Let's look at the standard script these things run on. First, they always ask permission. They cannot or will not just force their way into your home or vehicle. They need you to verbally or physically invite them across the threshold. It's a very old-school folkloric rule for an entity that's supposedly hanging outside a Texas movie theater trying to catch a screening of Mortal Kombat. Second, they use weirdly formal, archaic vocabulary. They don't talk like modern kids. They don't use slang. They say things like, "Our master is waiting," or "We require your assistance to utilize your telephone instrument." Okay, maybe not that extreme, but they call adults Mister, and they speak with a strange, rehearsed authority that feels like an alien trying to pass a high school drama class. Third, and perhaps the most frustrating, is that their excuses make absolutely zero sense in the modern era. Think about it. Most Black Eyed Kid encounters reported in the last 15 years still involve kids begging to come inside to use your landline phone. Look, I get that these things are terrifying, interdimensional, soul-harvesting entities, but are you going to tell me that they can cross the veil between worlds, yet they haven't figured out that nobody has a landline in their house since 2007? If a creepy kid knocks on my door in 2026 and asks to use my landline, that's a bigger red flag than the completely black eyeballs. Just update your script and ask to borrow a charger like any normal demon. But behind the humor, there's a deeply unsettling psychological element here. The sheer consistency of these stories across different states, countries, and decades mean either everyone is plagiarizing Brian Bethel's 1998 account, or there is a very specific type of encounter happening on the fringes of our suburbs. As we prepare to leave the surface and drop down into the mid-depths, the theories behind why they need that invitation are going to get a lot older and much more dangerous. Tier 2, the mid-depths. As we sink past the surface layer of basic internet creepy stories, we find ourselves in the mid-depths. This is where the modern digital mythos begins to grow roots in folklore and ancient history. And our first stop here is a rule we touched on earlier: the absolute necessity of permission. In almost every recorded account, the Black Eyed Kids stop dead in their tracks at the physical threshold of your home or vehicle. They will beg, plead, command, and even try to guilt trip you, but they won't just break a window or knock down a door. Now, if you're a fan of classic Gothic horror, or you've spent any time reading old European folklore, it's a massive neon-lit warning sign that should be flashing in your brain right now. This is the vampiric permission rule. Historically, vampires were bound by spiritual laws. A vampire could be a hyper-powerful, immortal creature of the night, but if a simple wooden door stands between it and its victim, it was completely powerless until the master of the house muttered a casual, "Come on in." The very second that invitation was extended, the spiritual protection of the home vanished. Are Black Eyed Kids just vampires who traded the tailored velvet capes for oversized fleece hoodies? Think about it. Vampires are famously pale. They hate the sunlight. They operate entirely in the shadows of the night. And their presence induces a paralyzing sense of dread. The only real life difference is that instead of turning into bats or offering you a glass of fine wine in a Transylvanian castle, these modern entities are knocking on a screen door in Ohio at 2 a.m. asking for a glass of tap water or to use your phone. It makes you wonder if there really is a cosmic hierarchy at play here. Like, did the ancient vampires look at the modern world and think, well, castles are too expensive to maintain in this economy. Let's just send out the interns into the suburbs and see if they can slip past the Ring doorbell. All jokes aside, this crossover into classic folklore suggests that whatever people are witnessing isn't a brand new phenomenon manufactured by a 1990s internet forum. It's an old terror weaving a new mask. Moving deeper into Tier 2, we hit a phenomenon that pushes the Black Eyed Kid mystery out of the realm of mere hallucination and into something that leaves a physical footprint on our world. Electromagnetic interference. A massive subset of witnesses report that right before they even realized a child was standing on their porch, the technology around them started acting completely unhinged. We're talking about porch lights suddenly burning out simultaneously. Car batteries, perfectly healthy, brand new batteries, dropping to absolute zero charge the moment a kid steps into the driveway. Smart TVs flickering into static, or cell phones losing every single bar of signal, leaving the victim completely cut off from the outside world. Now, from a narrative standpoint, this is a brilliant horror trope because it isolates the protagonist. But from a paranormal investigation standpoint, it points towards a massive discharge of electromagnetic energy. In ghost hunting lore, entities are believed to pull energy from the surrounding environment to manifest themselves physically. They drain AA batteries, they kill phone screens, and they make the lights flicker. If the Black Eyed Kids are pulling a massive amount of ambient energy just to hold their physical forms together in our dimension, it explains why your Wi-Fi router craps out the moment they step onto your lawn. Our final stop in the mid-depth tier is a theory that bridges the gap between paranormal demonology and high-level ufology, the Men in Black connection. Long before Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones turned the concept into a Hollywood blockbuster, the real Men in Black lore from the 1950s and 60s was profoundly unsettling. Original witnesses who claimed to have encountered Men in Black after UFO sightings didn't describe cool agents in sharp suits. They described things that barely seemed human. They reported men with perfectly smooth, pale, almost plastic-looking skin who wore ill-fitting, outdated suits that smelled like mothballs. They spoke in flat, robotic monotones, lacking basic human social cues, and didn't seem to understand how everyday objects like a ballpoint pen or any utensil actually worked. Essentially, they behaved like an alien species trying to look human based entirely on a poorly written instruction manual. Sound familiar? The behavior of the Black Eyed Kids mirrors classic Men in Black behavior with terrifying precision. The ill-fitting, slightly outdated clothing, the hyper-articulate mechanical speech patterns, the complete lack of genuine human emotion, replaced instead by a stiff, rehearsed mimicry of a child in distress. Could it be that the Black Eyed Kids are simply the next generation of the Men in Black? Think about the psychological strategy. If a 1950s government agency or an alien race wanted to drop an operative onto your porch to gather intelligence or gain entry into your home, a creepy guy in a trench coat is going to put everyone on immediate defense. But a child? Our evolutionary instincts are hardwired to protect children. We want to help them. We want to open up the door. It's a brilliant camouflage, but whoever engineered it forgot one crucial detail. They forgot to fix the eyes. They got the look with the hoodies right, but when they painted the windows of the soul, they couldn't match it. Because the absence of a soul is blackness. And as we prepare to leave the mid-depths and cross over into Tier 3, we're going to look at what happens to the people who didn't look closely at the eyes, the ones who actually opened the door and let these creatures inside. Tier 3, the dark zone. Now we are crossing a line. Up until this point on the iceberg, the Black Eyed Kids have been more of a psychological threat. Creepy kids on the other side of a locked door, draining your phone battery, acting like bad theater majors, and eventually vanishing into thin air when you refuse them. It's spooky, but you walk away with your life. But what happens if you don't? What happens if you actually fall for the act, extend that invitation, and open the door? To answer that, we have to look at one of the most famous, documented, and downright terrifying encounters in the entire Black Eyed Kid mythos. The rural Vermont case. The story takes place during a brutal winter storm. A woman, we'll call her Mary, and her husband are asleep in their isolated rural home when they're awakened by a loud, rhythmic knocking at the front door. Believing someone has crashed their car in the snow, Mary's husband rushes down and opens the door. Standing in the snow-covered porch are two young boys, shivering, jackets pulled tight, staring down at the ground. Mary, acting entirely on motherly instinct, immediately tells them to come inside to warm up by the fire while her husband makes them hot cocoa. They walk into the living room, sit stiffly on the couch, and just stare. Mary notices that her cats are completely terrified. One is hiding. The other is aggressively hissing from across the room. Her husband brings over the cocoa, and as he hands it to them, the kids look up. Their eyes are solid black, of course. The kids don't drink the cocoa. They just sit in absolute dead silence. Mary's husband instantly starts feeling dizzy. He develops an immense skull-splitting headache. The kids then stand up in perfect unison and say, "Our parents are here." They walk out the front door, leaving it wide open to the freezing winter air. When Mary looks out the window, she sees a black sedan idling at the end of the driveway with its headlights off. The kids get in, and the car drives away. Now, you might think, okay, that's incredibly creepy, but at least they didn't attack them. But here's where the story turns into a genuine horror movie. Within months of that brief encounter, Mary's husband was diagnosed with an incredibly rare, aggressive form of skin cancer. Mary herself began suffering from severe, unexplained dizzy spells, chronic fatigue, and a sudden onset of an autoimmune disease. Doctors were completely baffled by how fast their health disintegrated. This isn't an isolated report. Several fringe accounts of people who claim to have had interactions with black-eyed kids up close mention a lingering sickness afterwards. Mysterious nosebleeds, sudden hair loss, a rapid physical deterioration. It makes you realize that these entities aren't just looking for a warm place to sit or a landline phone. Their very presence seems to behave like a localized burst of biological radiation. They're parasites. They aren't trying to steal your wallet. They're literally draining your vitality. This physical destruction leads us directly to the theological angle. Now we're about to talk about some ancient biblical level dread. This is the demonic and Nephilim theory. If you look at the Black Eyed Kids through a traditional spiritual lens, They fit the exact clinical definition of demonic entities. In classic demonology, a demon can't simply possess a human or cross a threshold into a consecrated space without legal right or verbal permission. They rely on deception, trickery, and manipulation to get the target to willfully lower their spiritual defenses. By taking the form of a vulnerable child, these entities are using our own morality against us. They know that human beings are hardwired to protect the young. It's a spiritual Trojan horse. But there's a deeper, even more fringe theory that traces their lineage back to the book of Genesis, specifically the Nephilim. According to ancient apocryphal texts like the Book of Enoch, the Nephilim were the offspring of fallen angels and human women. They were an unnatural hybrid race that twisted the natural order of creation. When the Great Flood wiped out their physical forms, their spirits were left behind, condemned to wander the earth as disembodied soulless entities, forever hungry, forever seeking a way to experience the physical world again, but fundamentally empty. If the Black Eyed Kids are the modern manifestation of these ancient earthbound spirits, it explains everything. It explains why they look almost human, why their eyes are a literal void, because they have no soul. There's no spark of divine creation inside of them. It also adds a whole new layer of irony to their standard scripts. When they stand on your porch saying, "Let us in, we're late for our parents," or "Our master is waiting," they aren't talking about a soccer mom in a minivan down the street. They're talking about ancient cosmic forces that have been locked out of the light since the dawn of time. When you read through these encounters, a frustrating pattern emerges. You find yourself yelling at the screen. Why did you roll down the window? Why did you unlock the deadbolt? You saw their eyes. Are you that freaking stupid? You've never watched a horror movie in your life. But witnesses describe entering a state of absolute paralyzed compliance. It's a hypnotic trance, an oppressive mental fog that rolls over your consciousness the moment their voices hit your ears. Paranormal researchers call this being beholden. It behaves like a predatory evolutionary camouflage. Think about how certain predators in nature use mimicry or biological frequencies to paralyze their prey before they strike. The Black Eyed Kids seem to project a localized telepathic frequency that suppresses your logical brain. Witnesses say that while their eyes are screaming, "Don't open the door," their hands were actually moving on their own, sliding back the latch, turning the knob, completely disconnected from their survival instincts. It's a horrifying form of biological mind control. If you're a prisoner in your own body, watching yourself invite your executioner across the threshold. And honestly, from a purely tactical standpoint, you have to appreciate the hustle. Imagine being an ancient interdimensional demon, and your entire operation relies on a preteen trying to gaslight a homeowner through a locked screen door. If they didn't have that hypnotic fog to help them, they'd just get yelled at by a grumpy homeowner or chased off by the neighborhood dogs. But when that fog hits, your house stops being a fortress and it becomes a trap. As we prepare to leave the dark zone and plunge into Tier 4, the abyss, we're going to leave the psychological and biological theories behind and look at the absolute craziest, reality-shattering explanations for where some of these things actually come from. Tier 4, the abyss. We've arrived at the bottom of the iceberg. If you thought ancient demons using a middle school dial-up script was wild, welcome to the abyss. This is where the theories stop trying to play nice with our reality and instead snap it completely in half. First up at this depth is a favorite of the late-night paranormal radio crowd, the Covert Alien Hybridization Program. To truly understand this one, we have to look past the old-school gray aliens poking cattle in fields and focus on what a certain flavor of the UFO lore claims they've been doing for the last 50 years. Genetic splicing. According to abduction researchers like David Jacobs, the ultimate goal of these entities isn't just to study us, it's to replace us, or at least create a middleman species that can comfortably walk among us. When you look at the physical and behavioral breakdowns of the Black Eyed Kids, they read less like supernatural ghosts and more like biological prototypes out for a field test. Think about the evidence. They always wear clothing that looks brand new but entirely mismatched, like a costume bought off the rack by someone who understands the concept of fashion but has never actually worn pants before. They speak an incredibly stiff, repetitive language because they're running a linguistic program, a script meant to secure entry into a controlled environment. And then there's the physical tells. The pasty, featureless skin, the total lack of social awareness, and most importantly, those entirely black eyes. In UFO abduction accounts, the standard gray alien has large, glassy, black lenses covering its eyes. What if a black-eyed kid is simply a first or second generation human-alien hybrid whose genetic structure hasn't quite perfected the human ocular look yet? What if those voids aren't a sign of demonic possession, but rather a structural feature designed for a completely different planetary atmosphere? They aren't knocking on your door because they want to steal your soul. They're knocking because they are field testing their social camouflage, checking to see if a normal human adult can spot the stitch lines on their counterfeit humanity costume. And every time you tell them no and lock the door, you aren't just surviving an encounter, you're failing a quality assurance test for an incoming simulation. Probably. But let's say you don't buy the sci-fi explanation. Let's go down an even wider rabbit hole that loops right back into the fabric of the internet itself. This is the interdimensional glitch and tulpa theory. Let's be completely honest for a second. The Black Eyed Kids as a phenomenon did not exist in print, folklore, or urban legend prior to Brian Bethel posting his story in a forum in 1998. That's a historical fact. For decades, skeptics used this to declare the entire thing dead on arrival. A simple piece of early internet creepypasta that got out of hand. But what if the internet didn't just invent them? What if the internet manifested them? In Tibetan mysticism, there's a concept known as a tulpa, a physical object or being that's brought into actual material reality solely through collective spiritual or mental willpower. If enough minds focus intensely on a single concept, visualize it, fear it, and pour emotional energy into it, the universe eventually bends and brings that concept to life. Before 1998, the world didn't know what a black-eyed kid was. But after Bethel's post went viral, millions of early internet users read it, shuddered, and lay awake at night staring at their front doors, visualizing two pale children with pitch-black eyes knocking in the dark. By creating a collective global nightmare pool, the internet may have accidentally written a virus into the operating system of reality. We gave them their look, we gave them their rules, we gave them their exact repetitive dialogue. We spent decades treating them like a real threat. So reality finally sighed, adjusted its parameters, and let them across the border. The reason their behavior feels so fragmented and odd, the reason they vanish into thin air or cause electromagnetic equipment to go haywire, is because they are literal glitches. They're rendering errors in our environment, born out of an online chain letter. They don't have backstories. They don't have a home address. They don't have a master plan. They're just automated scripts running on the hardware of our collective fear. Seems possible, right? And that right there is the theory that freaks me out the most. If enough people focus their thoughts on something that doesn't exist, they can manifest it into existence. The human mind can go to some very dark places. And now that we're all connected through the internet, the collective thought is playing with a power more deadly than anything in history. Conclusion. When you look back at the entire architecture of the Black Eyed Kids Iceberg, from the early Forum Post of Abilene, Texas, all the way down to the ancient biblical hybrids and interdimensional rendering errors, you realize that the true horror of this legend doesn't come from what we know. It comes from the rules we are forced to play by. Whether they're demons, aliens, tulpas, or government spooks, every single encounter hinges on one fundamental universal constant. They cannot come in unless you let them. Our homes, our cars, our personal spaces, they're all somehow protected by an ancient invisible line of absolute free will. The universe, no matter how hostile or broken it might be, requires your consent to let the shadows in. So the next time you're sitting in your house late at night and a storm is raging outside and you hear that rhythmic, heavy knock on your front door, don't look through the peephole. Don't ask who it is. And whatever you do not worry about being polite. Because some guests aren't looking for shelter. They're looking for something far more sinister than your mind can comprehend. If you're into the creepy, macabre, and horrific, you've come to the right place. I'm just as weird as you, and I keep getting worse the older I get. I've written several horror novels I'd like for you to read and lose a good night's sleep over. You can find more information about me and my books over at chilledbones.com. Please like and subscribe for more high strangeness and horror-related content. I'll be putting up new videos about creepy things all the time, so stay tuned for that. I'm Robert Ference, and this is Chilled Bones.